Welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is writer and script reader and script consultant Nadia Attia. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Now, I've read out a long list there of job attributes, but you've also got something new in the pipeline. Do you want to just tell us what that is as well?
Yeah, so as well as script reading and script consulting, which sort of did freelance as well as a full-time job, I'm a writer of fiction as well. So in my spare time, I've been writing a book and managed to get myself an agent. And the book's coming out. Thank you. Yeah, that is an achievement, actually. A lot of rejections, actually. So there's a lot of, like when you're submitting stories for competitions and trying to get an agent, you've just got to, I kind of empathise with screenwriters because you're facing rejection all the time. And if you're not up for getting rejection, then you're kind of in the wrong business because that's part and parcel of what we do. So yeah, as a writer of fiction, I've managed to get an agent, and I've got my book's actually coming out in spring next year, 2023. So I'm really excited about that. It's not been announced yet, but it'll be real. It'll feel real when it's announced.
Yeah. And as I just to give the listener an insight, we were talking before about how much of a lead time that really is. That's not some sort of delay or anything. They picked the book up and then they went, right, we're going to space in 2023. Yeah.
It's a small sort of indie publisher, so that they couldn't really put it out as soon as I would like it to have happened. But I've just had to be really patient and keep my trap shut and just wait and see what happens. But yeah, I'm really excited for it.
But you've also got a new job, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, so I start in mid-May. I start my new role as a BFI Network Talent Executive for the Southwest region, working with a colleague. And basically that will mean I'm assessing short film scripts, deciding what gets funded, essentially helping the filmmakers to actually realise their project and get them made and get it out there and help them to promote, new talent. And one of my key sort of things that I really want to look for is like new diverse voices and supporting ethnically diverse people. Being from a sort of mixed ethnicity background myself, that's really important to me as well. Okay. And even in my writing as well, and the stories and the fiction that I write, I try and incorporate characters that have sort of varied backgrounds. So it's not just the same kind of stereotypical characters that are coming through. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. It's just like appeals to all of my skills as well, because I used to be a short filmmaker myself, so I've got a lot of empathy for that practical side of it as well. So it'd be really exciting.
It is. Well, congratulations from Britflicks for your new role, and I'm sure the people of the Southwest will be glad to have you. I got in touch with you because you tweeted about a mammoth job you'd done where you'd read 400 scripts during October 2021, and you had some thoughts on it. And your thoughts were on diversity, on authenticity, and a lot more. And we're going to use my 5x5 format to sort of unpack some of your observations and of that, and of just being what a script reader is. And as we've already established from your introduction, you're a writer and you're a reader. So you're not the
two sides of the coin. Yeah,
the two sides of the coin. And like I said to you before we recorded, I've never met a reader yet that isn't a writer. To be honest with you. So I think it's important people understand that, because I think, the bad script reader is the gatekeeper of my life. And no, they're often just another writer like you trying to find good work to read. When you're reading, and I hope this is what we'll be discussing, people want to read good stuff. They don't want to say no to everything. That's not a fun thing to do at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So for the listener that's never listened before, it is 5x5 minutes on each of the headings that we'll be looking at. We're calling this 5 things from a script reader's perspective, which is Nadia's, and hopefully I'll be able to join in with what little knowledge I have. And every 5 minutes, a dog will bark, and then we'll move on to the next one. Does that all make sense to you, Nadia?
Definitely, yeah, thanks. I do tend to waffle, so I think this format will be good for me.
It's good for you, it's good for me. Yeah. It means that, it guarantees us that we'll spend 5 minutes on each.
Cool.
Number 1 in your list of 5 things from a script reader's perspective is what makes a good script reader.
Yeah. So you mentioned that word gatekeeper earlier as well. And it's not, from a writer's perspective, it is just frustrating to sort of think, who are these people that are essentially blocking my progress? But I take that role really seriously, and it's a real privilege to be in the room and to be that person that's been asked to be a reader on the Channel 4 screenwriting course. I think there was like 6 of us readers. So we had this mammoth task in October last year of reading 400 scripts in about 4 or 5 weeks. So I had to literally read about 13 scripts a day to sort of keep on top of things.
Yeah.
But actually saying that, a lot of it is, you read a certain number of pages, and if you know it's not right, then you don't have to read the whole thing. So this is where, my sort of blog post came from, and that you just sort of discovered me on the tweet and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I took it as a huge responsibility, and it's a real privilege to be, quote unquote, the gatekeeper. And to sort of take on that role, I think you really need to sort of set aside your biases and look past the name on the title page. Like, I was deliberately skipping the title page if I could, and not looking at like, oh look, they've got an agent, oh they live in Hampstead, in London, whatever it is, and not thinking about who the writer was. Unfortunately, these weren't blind submissions, so it was, everything was there. Some people chose to write copious notes before the script actually started. Footnotes. Some of them wrote their own sort of grammar and language and things, and huge lists of characters and descriptions. But you just have to kind of sort of skip through that and look past it, and look past formatting as well, to a point, because some of the scripts weren't even formatted very well, and there was lots of like typos. It's somebody who showed a bit of an experience in actually writing a script, but look past that and actually look at the story underneath it and what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I remember on one of my very early script writing lessons, the teacher I had said he held up 2 scripts, and one of them looked like a dog's dinner, and one of them looked like a model script. And he said, which is the best script? And obviously the class all went, that one. And he went, no, the one that's got the best story, and just pointed them both of us. Because you can't tell by looking at a script just on format alone.
Yeah, so you've got to look past your own biases as well, and all of that sort of stuff, and just look at if there's a voice, if there's potential. I didn't look at people's CVs or research them if I saw their name or whatever until after I'd read the script. And you've got to consider diversity and representation within the story as well, but also be alerted to tokenism, which is something I found in some of the scripts, unfortunately, where people are just sort of adding stuff in just for the sake of ticking boxes. And you can sort of see that as a reader. You get a sense, and you can sort of tell that it's not coming from an authentic place. It's just somebody trying to kind of get noticed and like appear to be different. Without actually
the kind of thing where there's an obvious default that everybody's white, and then just add.
Yeah, I mean, they might write a really minor character, like the barista in the coffee shop is like a Latino gay or something, and then they have one line, and you're like, well, why did you feel the need to specify that? And if you want diverse characters, why don't you make them the main character and actually give them the story and write something that's fresh and unique?
Yeah.
There's just stuff like that, and it just sort of feels a bit obvious and disingenuous. Really.
No. I've read them myself. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, set aside personal taste is another thing that makes a good reader. Empathy for the craft and for the intention.
Out of interest, I mean, I've asked this of people who watch a lot of films, because I've interviewed buyers before. But as a reader, how do you set aside taste?
I mean, I don't love war films, and there's certain genres that I'm not a huge rom-com fan, but if something's written really well, the story's great, and a character's jumping to the page, I'm like, this is cool, this is brilliant, I totally recommend this. So it's just a question of not kind of having a chip on your shoulder or bias against certain things, or just being a bit snooty about, for example, rom-coms are often looked down on, and even in the literary world as well, like romance fiction is like, oh gosh, that's there's just like social kind of expectations that are just around us all the time. You've got to sort of look through that and wade through that and just kind of get to essentially what is the heart of the story, and what is this writer trying to say, and is it unique, is it different? Like with the full screenwriting task of reading these 400 scripts, a lot of it was just literally, is it fresh, is it unique, is it original enough, is it good enough to go through to the next round? Because often we would actually have a discussion with the other readers, and sort of pitch the stories that we loved, and then justify certain stories that we dismissed. Like, so Philip Shelley was leading on it. So if he would sort of question something, he'd be like, oh, I noticed this is in here. Why did you not put that through? Then you have to have...
Go on, finish your thought.
Run over. yeah, you have to have, justifications and reasons why you didn't necessarily put that script through. And just going on to my final points is that you kind of, as a good reader, needs to be kind of ruthless in a certain way, because a lot of time when you're reading for production companies, you need to just literally, sometimes it's a checkbox even. You're like, is the writing good? Is the premise good? And it's like, yes, no, whatever, pass, recommend, or, second read or whatever. So it is literally shorthand a lot of the time. And execs don't really have the time to look at stuff in detail. So they need you to be that first pass on the project and say whether it is a project that has commercial potential or maybe it doesn't, and the writer has potential. So you might want to flag that.
So that's just for the writer that's listening then. So when you're reading for that time poor executive, are they saying to you then, we're looking for, you've got your checklist of tip, they might say, I really want to find, the diamond in the rough, or I want to find the polished genre piece, or what, you kind of know what you're looking for, or is it just everything and you point it out?
Some production companies do say, we want you to read this for the writer's potential, and some companies just want a general read where you're covering everything. Yeah. So when it's for the potential of the writer, then they kind of have obviously found someone that they think could be interesting. They just need you to do a sort of judgment on whether they have got the chops, as it were, to actually carry a script or carry a TV series, which is a huge responsibility.
Of course, yeah.
And I know I've run over, but I had two more little points.
Well, no, please do. No, please do. You're all right.
Someone who's able to flag the good and the bad. So if you're reading, and specifically if you're giving notes to the writer, which is very different from giving notes, this ruthless checkbox thing to execs or whatever, you've got to flag the good and the bad, and don't try to fix the story, because it's not yours to tell. And that's something that I've really had to stop myself from doing, because I'm a fixer and I'm a doer, and I'm like, if we just move that scene there, or we should take that, or maybe with this device would work better. But I've had to really not do that when I'm working with a writer, and instead you literally interrogate and ask questions, and you let them make the decisions on the story, because it's their story to tell, it's not yours.
No, I did exactly that only last weekend with a script where it was like, why this, why that, I love this, why did the character do that? So instead of saying, like you say, instead of saying, I think the character, what you're saying is, instead of me saying what would be potentially wrong would be say, the character should do this, which is none of my business really. If the question is, what have they done already? That's the question, isn't it? It doesn't make sense because of X, Y, Z or whatever. They're a spy. Why would a spy do this?
Yeah, and a lot of it is just sort of, it's like almost like being a detective and kind of looking through the layers of the story, and you kind of digging deeper and deeper and sort of saying, okay, well, that didn't quite work. Something's snagging here and I can't put my finger on it. What is it? Just asking questions and kind of getting that from the writer and challenging them, saying, have you considered this? Or why did you write it in this way? Or why is it set in this particular city, or whatever it is? And it just kind of opens loads more doors and throws up more questions, but also more ideas. And then the writer will literally sort of steer it themselves in
I love that part of it, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
When someone's asking you questions, it's whether it's at the pre-prep stage of a script or when one's been drafted, the minute they start asking you, it also gives you as the writer an idea of whether they've read the script that you thought you'd written. Because if their questions are about some other bloody type of film, then you've done something horribly wrong. It's not necessarily what they're going to ask you, but your intentions. It's a clue to what your intentions, how your intentions have been received.
Because the writer can be so close to the story that they just don't. They haven't got that perspective. So a script reader, and me being a writer, my agent or the editor, the book publisher, they give me a different perspective, and they're asking me these sort of questions, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So you read it in that way, and that's not what I intended. So it's really interesting. Basically, readers are on your side.
Yes, totally. No, I had 2 readings of a script recently where they both were positive, but what they fed back positively was of 2 different films.
Oh wow!
So I'm waiting on another couple of reads to see where it's landed, because it's like, I know what I hoped I wanted. I know what I hope to get, but I'm not going to discount this other avenue that's possibly there that I've found by accident. Because why would I? If that's what it's doing, then exploit it, because it's not a bad thing. The last thing
that what makes a good reader is obvious one, but someone who loves storytelling, and that's me. So yeah, someone who loves storytelling and watches a lot of films, a lot of TV, reads books. Someone that just loves narrative and
I think it goes without saying, the idea of taking on the task of 400 scripts in the first place. There's got to be a level. It'd have to be pretty sadomasochistic to take that on if you didn't enjoy storytelling.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right then, number 2, what readers look for?
So firstly, what is the story about? Are we frustrated by an opaque narrative? Are we bored? Like a lot of the scripts I was reading, I was just like, I don't even know what this is. What is this? What's the story? 12 pages in and I still have no idea. And that's not good. No. A good handling of vocabulary and dialogue is great. Originality, as I said, like I was always sort of thinking, like, is this fresh? Is it new, different? Flow and structure, is it easy to read? Which also sort of goes back to like, what is this? Building up to something, is it if it is structurally different and intriguing, then is that a stylistic decision that's working? Is it building up to something, or is it just sort of showy? And is it more frustrating than it is intriguing? Also look for a clear tone or an atmosphere that suits the story. Some of the scripts can be quite muddled, so they might say, "Oh, this is a horror film," and then you kind of read it and like, "Where's the horror? Where's the atmosphere? Where's the gore? I want to feel scared. Give me some more." And like, just do more with it. Prove the genre.
Yeah.
And then believable characters who want something is obviously really important in any script, any story. And authenticity is a big one for me. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying about tokenism as well, but in character, in world building, in everything. And that goes for genre projects as well. So even if you've got like some kind of sci-fi fantasy, you're building a world and you want that world to feel authentic and you want the reader and the viewer to go on that journey with you. So it absolutely has to be, you might even write a whole backstory for it. It doesn't get into the script on the page, but you've got to know your world inside out and be convincing when you're writing about it. Those are kind of the key things that the readers look for. And then the first 12 pages, obviously this has been said a lot. And,
yeah. But it's good to hear it, though. It's good to hear it if it's true.
So important, isn't it? Like, because those are the opening. Like, don't submit draft 1. Don't just think, oh shit, there's a competition deadline. I've got to get this in quickly. Hone it, because we'll know as a reader, sometimes by page 5, which sounds quite brutal, but you'll just know if it's a script that you want to take forward or not, just based on the quality of what's in front of you. So the opening is so important. I don't know is this of interest, but I could read a few of like my real sort of shorthand notes from my channel.
If you want to share them with us, please. No, that'd be lovely.
Yeah. Just to give you an idea of like, and this was really just to caveat this, is very, very shorthand, me scribbling my notes down, because if I ever got questions on, oh, why didn't you put that through, or why did you put that through?
Yeah.
I've got like backup to sort of say, oh, this is why. And again, it does seem very shorthand and probably a bit sort of terse, but this is stuff that you would never pass on to the writer.
Yeah, no. Look, I mean, when I'm doing it with people I know, I always say, look, this is just my reaction as I'm reading it. This isn't a diplomatic thought, so don't be offended by it.
Yeah. So and obviously this is all anonymous, and no names, nothing. We can't tell who does what here. But one of my notes was, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. 12 minutes in, nothing has happened apart from character intros. Characters all seem roughly sketched, leaning on stereotypes, which is kind of what I said before. It's like, it's not going anywhere. 12 minutes in, I don't know what this is about. Another one is the writing is very novel-esque, a bit too much detail, a flowery description, and a heavy focus on audio. The action is surreal, switching between ethereal real world and memories that become distorted. Then it cuts to a car chase scene. Nothing really hangs together plot-wise, so this would be hard to follow on screen. I understand that the writer wants to retain some mystery and clearly enjoys language and words, but all this comes at the sacrifice of story. There are certain things as a reader, just like, this is someone who can write, and they clearly love dialogue and vocabulary, but it's not enough to just write flowery language.
They should be writing a novel, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the projects I was just like, yeah, this is a novel. I've got another note, very disjointed, broken sentences to the point where it's slightly grating. I think this was a play, actually. I know the main character is distressed, but there still needs to be some kind of flow to the speech for us to follow. Stuttering, etc., isn't the only indication of emotion. Another one-sided monologue, no real interaction, just talking at the audience. And that was another thing that I didn't like as well. Like if character just talks at the audience or character talks at each other, it's not really involving you in the story, and it's not kind of immersing you in it. It's just almost like the writer's got something to say. They just need to bang it out and say it.
Yeah.
Without thinking about weaving it into an actual story or making it feel authentic. Or more. lack of putting us in the place, grounding us at the location. Characters talk at each other and go off on rambling tangents that don't feel connected to anything and unlikely to be two things 16-year-olds would say to each other. Conversation turns dark and bizarre very quickly, and we still don't actually know context or what this is about. Is this just the writer trying to be edgy or shock? That's fine, but it still needs something driving the story forward. So it sort of goes back to what I was saying before.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. No, I mean, to be honest with you, what's also interesting is for someone like I've never done the kind of volume you've done of reading, but it's my biggest concern always when I'm reading is that bit where you go, "What's this about?" I'm 15 pages in, and I just know there's 6 people involved, and I sometimes think it's me. You think, have I just missed something? And you go back over.
Sometimes I would skip to the end of the, skip to the end of the project and the script or whatever, and just see if I missed something. Did I completely miss the concept here? But like 100% every time, it's not. It's actually just not very good writing.
If you can't remember it, don't worry about it. But I'd be fascinated to know, because I think sci-fi and horror, certainly where you take us out of the human realm or you go into a future realm, and that world building becomes almost like architectural rather than just simply saying what room you're in. If I say I'm in a pub, we know what a pub is. And if I say it's a traditional pub, we have a view of it. But if I say I'm in the control room of a whatever, suddenly you're like, what the hell's that? And I think that, I remember reading one time that, all potential sci-fi scripts are dogged by the fact that we're going to imagine Blade Runner or Star Wars. It's kind of, so is there any good tricks that you saw in scripts where they were using good shorthand to create the world building on the page without having to be too florid?
Yeah, well, you sort of did it yourself there, where you were like using comp titles and things. So it's like Blade Runner meets whatever, like Star Trek or something, which sounds odd.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why you can't. And this was another one of my sort of points, I think, in that blog post that you read, was just you've got space as the writer to write really amazing descriptions and put us into this world and give us these characters and like really give us like texture and tone and atmosphere. And a lot of the scripts were just so sparse in their descriptions that you kind of didn't know, I know this person's 30 years old. I know nothing else about them, or they might have brown hair. And it's like, it's a university lecture hall. I'm like, okay, great. Where? What city? Where are we? Is this modern day? And it just sort of feels a bit like writers sometimes forget to let us into the story.
Right.
And they just might assume knowledge because it's in their head. They can see it perfectly. They can sort of see the movie or the TV show in their head, but they're just not translating it onto the page, which is a real shame. But I actually, perhaps if I haven't run out of too much time, I've got a good note to compare. Because a lot of my notes were just like, it's just dull, weird banter, doesn't really go anywhere. Humor that doesn't land, jokes that are like a bit of bad taste, trivializing serious subjects and stuff like that. But on a good side, this is one of my good notes I'll share.
Mm-hmm.
To make it sound like I'm not just a horrible...
You're not a tyrannical reader.
Tyrannical, yeah, exactly. So I've got the good note was the teaser opening isn't quite successful, and there are 1 or 2 flashbacks we could do without. Stick with me. Mm. However, this is understated writing that has a distinct tone to it, a real confidence, and despite there being little action in most of the scenes, there's a brooding subtext to the work, strong characterization, and excellent emotional beats. The writer understands filmmaking and has some interesting visual ideas. The suggestion of a single camera take for a turning point confrontation is particularly effective. A bigger reveal is needed at the end of the episode, and there are pacing issues, but despite the script's flaws, it shows that the writer is a talented storyteller with potential.
I'd take that note every day.
Yeah, and that was one of the writers that actually got onto the course as well, so I was really pleased. That was one I was going to fight for as well.
Brilliant.
So it's really great when you get good scripts.
No, and also what you described there is it's not about describing perfect. It's because something's going to be developed beyond you having, whether it's a competition or submitting to an exec or however able to put a script in front of someone. That script is not, however many people you've had help you develop it. And this is something I've over the last few years I've sort of been to appreciate, is that I can have a finished script, and then a director can come on board, and the director has his or her thoughts on it. And so I've either got to respond to that or do nothing. Now, to do nothing risks losing the director. And if you're getting on, you might want to respond to it and try and build the script. And I think it's interesting that that's also part of how you read the scripts as well. You're going, I can see where this could go. This is...
Yeah. It's exciting, yeah, because you see the potential. And that's the key thing about readers. They kind of, like you say, you don't want to be the one saying no all the time. You actually want to find the diamonds in the rough and support new talent and bring new talent through. So I was really keen to do that with all of my script reading, actually. I kind of look at it with an open mind, and then my patience kind of runs out to a certain point, and then you start getting the notes where it's just like, oh, it's just dull, it's not working, it's nothing new. But yeah,
and that is, I mean, I must admit, again, not done of the same volume, but I know that feeling when you're kind of waiting for it to kick into when's the good going to come, and you're
willing it to work. Yeah.
Right then, talking of making it work, number 3 is avoid brackets or play with clichés and stereotypes. Do you want to tell us what your observations there are? Yeah,
so reading a lot of scripts. I read for this Channel 4 thing, but I've also read books for the BBC and manuscripts, TV plays, all kinds of stuff for BBC and Studio Canal and various other people, Green Door Pictures as well. So this is kind of covering the gamut of like reading experience that I've had. But it's prevalent as a cliche that a lot of scripts just have that. They wake up, there's like the alarm going off. Oh shit, I'm late. I'm going to jump in the shower. I'm going to make some toast, and then making some tea. And you're sort of like, gosh, you've just wasted all this page space on somebody waking up in crumpled bed sheets and then making tea. And it's so frustrating because it still happens. And the whole unpaid bills, overdue stamp on the envelopes and all this kind of thing. And then again, and with cliches and stereotypes, there's also a lot of, I found, white middle class domesticity or poverty porn on the flip side. Traditional families, no distinction between characters, overuse of teasers, cold opens, which can really work. Like they can definitely work in the right place. Yeah. But it almost felt like a lot of the sort of teasers in these scripts were just almost like saying, I don't really have 100% confidence in my scene 1, so I'm just going to throw this bit in here of like this bomb going off just to make you like keep reading.
Yeah.
And you don't need that. I think people just need to be way more confident in how they start their story in their scene 1, and not just, have all these bells and whistles that are sort of ultimately distracting from what the actual real story is.
Are you sort of are you describing a sort of instance where it sort of goes off like a rocket and then it just grinds to a halt, and you're kind of in some sort of, it's almost like they try to buy time, not tell a story?
Yeah, but also it's sometimes so obtuse that you're kind of like, well, I don't know who that person that just whose dead body is lying there. That doesn't mean anything to me because I don't know who that person is. But maybe you should introduce them first, and then I'll care about what I've just seen. Do you see what I mean? It's a bit more, and a lot of the sort of showy things come up in scripts, kind of time jumps, flashbacks, sort of heavy-handed narratives. I kind of maybe feel like you should give the audience more credit. And on the flip side, if you know what these cliches and stereotypes are, you can subvert them, subvert the norm. So do something interesting with them. Like audiences are smart enough to know what these stereotypes are. So actually flip it and surprise us, So that's what I mean by avoid or play with cliches and stereotypes. And then do your research was the thing that I found, that writers, maybe they're a bit hasty in entering competitions or but factually and for character background and settings. So if you step out of your social bubble, and do your research, you're much more likely to write something that feels authentic, even though it's not your lived experience. So I wouldn't say that you should limit your vision to only like, oh, well, I've only gone to a state school in Hampshire, so that's all I can write about. But no, you can't. You can write about anything, but just give it, treat it with integrity and do your research. And like, you can have sensitivity readers, you can work with consultants, you might want to work with a co-writer to make it, authentic. I mean,
you look at, the big film out at the moment, The Northman. Robert Eggers wrote with an Icelandic writer, so he could get his head around the Icelandic sagas.
Yeah, and he does a lot of research for his films as well, like The Witch as well. He wrote that in sort of the oldie English
in the New Puritan English,
And then The Lighthouse as well. He really researched maritime language and slang and stuff like that. And it really shows in the actual finished product in the script.
So are you saying you're reading sort of let's say you're reading a period piece or something, and they're talking like they're in 2022 London? You might read a script like that in terms of people not having done the research, or I made a mistake. I remember I made a mistake on a script that was set in Rio. And it was a really simple mistake to make, but not one if you're not Portuguese Brazilian. I'd had the character called Javier, and they said that's Spanish.
Yeah,
it begins with an X when it's Portuguese. You're like, oh right, okay. And so suddenly, and it was the name of the character, So it was falling at the first fence. And had I not had a Brazilian read it, I could have sent it out, and everyone's going, well, this guy hasn't a clue what he's talking about.
Well, those are quite easy to fix in the edit stage. So
yeah, but if I'd sent it out to a stranger to say, read my work, it'd have been, who's this clown? Whereas luckily I got a Brazilian to read it first, and they went, whoa, just on a sec, Stuart, And then that was you're right, it's an easy fix, but it's a big mistake to make if you sent it out to people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you're doing yourself the best favour by doing as much research as possible, and having beta readers and people check it before you send stuff out, for sure, like definitely. And then that's the way you can avoid these stereotypes and cliches. So it's definitely better to be prepared and have your research done.
Indeed. Right then, number 4, let us in and then read the room.
Yeah. So like some of those notes that I read out earlier, part of it is when you're a reader reading a script, you sort of think, is this just a vanity project? Is this just someone trying to be too clever? They've got all this sort of like bitchy banter that's going around in circles, but is it really saying anything? Does this serve the story, or is it just serving the writer because they've just got a chip on their shoulder and something to say? For example, it could just be a series of vignettes, or it might be a verbose didactic monologue, or is it just like kind of witty pub banter gag or a scene that you've tried to stretch to 90 minutes? You can sort of tell as a reader if someone's probably got this like brilliant joke and they've just kind of pushed it, and it's just like, yeah, okay, we get it, it's too much now. So that's kind of, to read the room as well is also, in a sense, like think about, is this in poor taste? Are you trivializing something really serious like mental health or alcoholism or abortion or whatever it is, and like just for cheap gags? And that's not very nice to read, and that does kind of put you on the sort of more negative sphere of when you're reading. You're obviously trying to read with an open mind, but some things can certainly sort of trigger emotions, and then that might sort of affect how you read the rest of the script. It sort of puts you off a little bit.
Yeah, if people sort of have a traumatic incident and then cut to they've gone for a jog and now they're having a coffee with a friend and they're laughing, and there's been no reaction beyond the immediate reaction to that trauma, like the character doesn't appear to have responded to it at all, really.
Yeah. And then I'd say don't assume knowledge, is I kind of mentioned that before as well, but don't sort of deliver really kind of blunt exposition. The audience is smarter than you think, so you can do it quite subtly, but not too opaque, because we'll just get lost. And then like some of my notes were saying, it's just like 12 pages in, I'm like, what is this? I don't know what's going on.
But there's a difference between there being no story and assuming that someone understands what you're talking about, because you look at something like Eric Eisenhower's Arrival. I'm sure that was an absolute head fuck to read when you come to it cold, given what it's talking about. And it'd be, the kind of things that it involved, they're not sort of traditional visual things. Ink blots moving around wouldn't necessarily sound. So you'd have to be really specific in some moments, and then pull back on others. To keep. I mean, subtlety is a hard one. I think it's like subtlety and exposition sort of walk a fine line, don't they? Because
it's really hard, actually. Yeah, because you don't want to be so blunt and over the top that it's like, this is happening here and this is what's going on now, this character's doing. But being too subtle when I pay it is a really fine line, and that's the skill, that shows the skill of the writer if they get it right. And you don't even notice that as a reader. You just kind of whiz through it and you're like, wow, I've got to the end of the script. How did that happen? And then a couple of things I noticed as a reader that and it sounds really obvious, and it's like teaching your grandmothers suck eggs.
We always need to confirm what we already know. Don't worry about that, Nadia.
Yeah, it's such a weird saying. Anyway, so if for example, you're writing a radio play, you need to remember that listeners don't get the scene descriptions. And if you're writing a TV or film script, you need to remember that the audiences won't get the scene descriptions. So when someone's giving you loads of character background and then like really intrinsic detail, and you're kind of like, well, the viewer is not going to see any of this. So you actually need to put it in the actions and the dialogue. And a lot of writers sort of forget that. I think part of that is probably just, again, being really close to your project, that you know the story inside out, but you're not thinking about letting the viewer in and letting the reader in and kind of going, oh, right, yeah, so this is literally what they're going to see. So I need to write that clearly so that makes sense. And then another sort of point, I guess, was, that thing about jokes and banter, is it misjudged? Just read the room. Just, make sure that what you're saying is poignant, sure, but don't offend people for the sake of a joke. And humour was really, really, it's a really hard thing to write and to get right. Like a lot of my notes were just like, the humour doesn't land, it doesn't work, it's not on point, it's not funny. They're trying to be witty, but it's just not working. And it's just so hard. And I know that's a bit of a taste thing as well, but it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from heart and from kind of some honest place of, I've got something to say here and I've got a really interesting, subversive way, irreverent way of saying it. And those are the scripts that work the best when they're coming from a place of authenticity rather than just a sort of, like I said before, like a vanity project.
Yeah.
And like a couple, just to round off what I was saying, just, is it the right script for now? Why do you want to tell this story? Is the script tapping into the zeitgeist, or is it challenging it? What's it saying about the world today? Even period dramas can have like universal connection. Like when I was reading period dramas, I was like, this is really well written and they've got a lot of detail, and actually, it's a decent writer, but it's not actually saying anything different or fresh, and it's not giving us a different perspective that we can relate to the world today, or seeing ourselves reflected in it. So think about that as well.
It's a tough one. I mean, and obviously when somebody's work's being assessed like separate to them, as opposed to talking around a table, the answer to the question, why this story and why now? I mean, it's often the hardest question to answer when you're at any stage of a story development, because, at one point, at some point, you just kind of, you're thinking, because I think it'll be interesting and I don't know yet. But obviously, once you've written a screenplay, you should have found out why you wanted to write, what it was that really drove you, because you'll have dug into it and you'll have exposed what it was that interested you, or you should have done. If you haven't, then you've kind of fannied about, haven't you?
Yeah, but it is so hard when someone says to you, okay, quick, give me the elevator pitch on your book or your film or whatever it is. It's so hard. You're like, whoa, okay, yeah, what is this about? You start questioning yourself as a writer, and you're just like, is that coming through? Is this what I wanted to say? It's really interesting.
No, I think at every stage. I mean, I've got into the habit now of talking to people about my ideas before I've written much down at all, and just seeing what they come back with.
Yeah,
because that way you can begin to understand if there is something to say or not. Because if they don't ask you any questions, then you have to wonder whether there's anything in it. But if they start going, oh yeah, what about this and what about that, and you're like, yeah, there's loads in this, isn't there? And it's not that you're going to use it all, but just that idea that it sparks there you go, yes, in whatever which way they go, you can suddenly begin to feel, oh, right, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. This is touching a nerve of some description. I should really go for this. Right. Definitely. Then, talking of which, don't squander the blank page. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we as the readers and the audience, we just want to be transported, and we want to trust the writer. And like, we're there, we're open, we're ready to be moved by your words. So you kind of need to deliver on your promise. So like I was saying earlier, if it's a horror, then I want the atmosphere and I want the gore and I want it to feel like a horror.
Yeah.
And then if you set something up, we obviously need the payoff. So it's that Chekhov's gun thing. And you need to sort of, I'd imagine, strike the right balance in detail so that we're immersed in the world but not bored. So scene descriptions are really important. You can be overly detailed, but there were scripts where it's just like, they were so scant that I was just like, I don't really know what this is. So you need to, the scene descriptions are basically a window to the reader. So you can give them a sort of essence of your personality in those scene descriptions. So use the blank page, use the space to show us what you're made of, show us what you've got, and like show us a bit of your personality without being too over familiar or, like, hey, witty bands. But you can definitely put a lot in the scene descriptions to really build atmosphere. And it's so striking when a writer gets that right, and you just kind of you're in it and you're with it and you're like on board and you trust them. So those are really nice reads when you just kind of whiz through a script and you're like, oh, right, it's the end. How did that happen? So yeah, really, really important to kind of let us in and, you use those bits of space, use the scene descriptions, location descriptions, character descriptions really well.
Do you think, when you say about expecting payoffs, do you think in those instances where you didn't get the payoff, that the writer really set it up and you've identified a good setup that's sort of been left hanging, or they've forgotten to pay it off? What's your view? Have you took a view on that at all? Yeah,
sometimes it's just like a lukewarm ending almost. It's like, oh, okay, this character's supposedly gone on this journey, you've set this thing up, but then the ending doesn't deliver, so you're kind of left a bit cold.
Right.
So you've read the whole project, the whole script, and you got to the end and it's just kind of really disappointing because it didn't really deliver on what you thought it was going to deliver. Like I was saying about sort of stereotypes and cliches, if you know it and you can subvert it, then that's interesting. Like, so if you do a setup and then you don't deliver, but you've done something else instead, you're like, aha, here's a twist. You thought this was going to be, this kind of outcome, but actually now it's going in a totally different direction. That's fine, but you've got to give us something. There's endless possibilities in a script, and I think just so many of them have just been kind of squandered on kind of rehashing old stories and relying on tropes. And a lot of them, I was like, I just want expand the world. I don't want all these domestic settings. I was really kind of hungry for like lots of new kind of worlds and atmospheres and different perspectives. And a lot of that is to do with diversity as well. But it's just, part of me was sort of thinking, don't stay in your lane. Actually write don't write what you think is expected of you. Write what you want to write, and actually put the research and put the effort in and write something that's like coming from a place of authenticity within you. And it's like, no matter what the genre, it's going to be relatable and it's a universal theme or a subject that's going to hook us.
Yeah, because it's the lived experience, isn't it? So when you say watch something like, say, Dead Man's Shoes, Shane Meadows' film,
yeah,
he takes you onto a council estate, which is, a particularly dreary setting that we've seen 100 times. But then he takes us into the world of petty gangsters. So you think you're in a setting you understand, and then he gives the gangsters a 2CV to drive around in. So now it's absurd, but it's brilliant and it's visual and it gives you something to think about beyond. There's some bad guys on a council estate which we've seen 100 times.
Yeah, there's layers.
Yeah, we're now like, why are they driving around in a 2CV? You can't, all those kind of things, and it's easy. It's easy. It seems easy when you point out the sort of exceptions, but it is about saying, look, yeah, Britain's not a fairground everywhere we go, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be interesting. And mundane can be good, and if you use it to your advantage. I mean, I remember watched a film called The Devil Inside, which is set in Mansfield, and it's on a suburban estate. And I complimented the director on the fact that he nailed that essence of British mundanity, because it was part of the tension was that nothing's going to bloody happen. This is, we have to escape this for something to happen.
But then what's really important in a scenario like that is that we've got to really love the characters and be on board with, not love them as in like, they can be villains, they can be awful, but they have something that, we engage with the characters, and that's the thing that's really going to drive the story forward. So, there's been brilliant films like 12 Angry Men. It's just like one room and it's amazing and it works. And that's characters. And I guess in summary, what I want to say was just, everyone wants like fresh and edgy and they want an authentic voice. But I reckon if you're a writer, don't overthink it and don't try too hard. Just write from the gut, because that's like when you were saying about, you were describing your project to a friend and they were like, oh, that sounds interesting. There's like a spark that you get, isn't there, when you hit that someone relates to. So just find those little sparks and those nuggets and just really go for it. And think about why you need to tell the story and why you're the best person to tell it. And that was something that I kind of learned through my kind of writing courses that I've done and the London Writers Awards and writing my book and everything as well. That's one thing when you're trying to sort of write your synopsis and pitch your project. It's like, that's something you really got to think about. Why am I the best person to write this story? And that's your voice. That's essentially, it's such a hard thing to pin down, but that's you and that's your voice and that's what you're putting on the page.
Question I wanted to ask you, but I had to wait till the end, is of the 400 you read, that's a great snapshot of a moment in time. So in October 2021, did you sort of do statistical and not to just like genres and periods and all that kind of stuff? Was that recorded as part of the process? So was there 60% sci-fi and 20% period and all that kind of stuff. It was.
No, it wasn't actually captured statistically. There's just, so many entries because it's such a prestigious competition, the Channel 4 Screen. But in my batch, I got a lot of sort of domestic dramas, a lot of people talking about mental health, which was great because I feel like that's a modern thing. Like now we're talking about mental health. It's brilliant. And there were a lot more like gay relationships than you would normally see. So that's great as well that we're, looking at different sexual orientations and different gender roles and different just society. Instead of putting us in little boxes, people were sort of really expressing that there is this massive diversity of who you are, who you can be, how you live, and expressing different opinions. And that I found that really refreshing. Some did it better than others, like I said. Some felt a bit tokenistic, but it's just the fact that that's clearly what audiences want and what the writers think the Channel 4 commissioners want as well. Shows that it's much more open and willing to be more accepting of other people and other people's opinions and how they want to live their life. And I thought that was really refreshing. There wasn't enough sort of supernatural sci-fi for me because I love the horror, all that sort of genre stuff. But yeah, there was it was a good variety. But you did sort of see certain things repeating themselves and themes, and then I felt like maybe the period pieces, although they could have been really well written, they just weren't really what was right for that particular competition.
Right. Okay.
And for that sort of the assessment that we were sort of doing for the Channel 4 screenwriting course, because you've also got to think about the destination. Where is this project going to be on screen? Like what would, where would it land? So I did have that in the back of my mind a little bit when I was reading for them as well. And as you do as a freelance reader, you've got to think, is this right for the BBC? Is this right for Studio Canal or whatever? Yeah. And it does sound quite harsh, dismissing things and doing check boxes and all sorts. But ultimately, we want really great stories, and we're trying to find great stories, and we're trying to sort of champion those voices that are coming through. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm just really privileged to be in the room doing it.
No, and it sounds like you're doing stellar work. So let's remind people then, you're a reader, obviously, and a script consultant. Remind everybody, what's your new job you've got with the BFI?
So it's BFI Network Talent Executive for the Southwest region, Film Hub Southwest. So based at Watershed in Bristol. And I start that sort of mid-May, working with a colleague, another talent executive, and that will be assessing short films. And there's emerging features fund as well, so we'll be assessing projects for that.
That's exciting.
And then helping filmmakers develop their projects and get them out there and promote them, and hopefully finding some great new voices as well.
But it just gives me to say thank you very much for giving your time on the Britflicks podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege. Thank you very much.
What's that place you've always wanted to try? Well, you're there, sharing plates with
just one bite.
Or on second thought, maybe not sharing. It's that good. When you're with Amex, it's not if it's going to happen, but when. American Express. Don't live life without it.